evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I want to formally welcome you all to our third talk this semester in the Brookings Scholar Lecture Series here at UNLV. I want to take a moment to thank you all on behalf of my colleagues Bill Brown, Ashley LeClaire, our Executive Director Dave Demore, our colleagues from the Lindsay Institute, our entire staff of student researchers. Just want to welcome you and thank you for being here. I want to take a moment also to thank our team at UNLV TV who is assisting us with recording this lecture tonight. In just a few days, this recording will be available up on our website so that you can share it with colleagues and friends after the fact. And there'll also be those PowerPoint slides that you'll see tonight from Molly's lecture, so don't worry about scribbling all of your notes quickly. They will be available to you very, very soon. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge our donor, Tom Kaplan from Wolfgang Puck Fine Dining Group, who's here this evening. Without his support, none of the things that we do here would be possible. I just want to thank him for being here. We've had the pleasure this week of welcoming our colleague Molly Kinder here to UNLV for her first visit as part of the Brookings Mountain West program at UNLV. The topic of tonight's lecture on the present and future of work for women is one I know many of us are deeply interested in, and the importance of her work in the context of our city cannot be understated. So we're really excited to learn more. Molly's joining us this week from the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., where she is a fellow in Brookings Metro program. Like all our visiting scholars, Molly's been having a really busy and engaged week. She's been doing lots of public engagements in addition to some of the typical work that is done by our Brookings colleagues. She spoke earlier today with the business and economic development community in our city. She's been meeting with UNLV faculty, speaking in classes, workshops, and if you're paying attention, tomorrow morning she'll be on KNPR. So if for our local radio listeners, you'll also catch her there tomorrow morning. Before we turn things over to Molly, I want to take just a brief moment to share her background with you all. She comes to Brookings with nearly 20 years of experience in policy research and innovation. Her research presently is currently centered on the present and future of work, especially for low-wage workers, women, and workers of color. At Brookings, her research brought light to the voices and perspectives of workers at the front line of the COVID-19 pandemic to inform policy recommendations to better compensate, protect, and support essential workers. Couldn't be more relevant to our city. Prior to joining Brookings, Molly was a non-resident senior fellow at New America and director of research for its Work, Workers, and Technology initiative. She has taught graduate courses at Georgetown's McCourt School of Public Policy and served as vice president and co-founder of a $200 million social impact fund. Molly also served in the Obama administration as director of an innovation program at USAID, and she holds degrees from the University of Notre Dame and from Harvard. We will have a bit of time after the talk today to answer questions, so please save those for the end. Without further ado, if you'd help me welcome Molly up to the podium.
Can everyone hear me okay? Is it okay? Well, first, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be with all of you at UNLV. I want to give a special shout out to the students who are here, who've heard me speak a few times. I feel like there's this amazing community of students who are involved with Brookings out here at UNLV. I've been so blown away by their interests, their talent, their curiosity, their smarts. It's been such a fulfilling time, and it's only, I think, Tuesday. So really, it's been such a pleasure to be here. I've met with a lot of faculty as well. It's just an amazing campus, and how lucky are we at Brookings in Washington to have this relationship. So thanks for hosting me. This is only my second time in Las Vegas. The first time was just for fun, so this is a more meaningful engagement. And I'm delighted to have the chance to give this lecture. We don't often get the chance to pull our thoughts together in sort of a coherent lecture, so this talk tonight is weaving together two of my current projects, but just a lot of my passion and personal experience and interest. So I just want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the present and future of work for women. That doesn't mean I'm also not interested in the present and future work for men. So many of these issues are universal, but I'm going to be particularly bringing a gender lens to this conversation. And the inspiration for this is how many of you were here when Richard Reeves gave a talk. Okay, so we have quite a few folks. Have others heard of Richard Reeves, potentially? Richard is a colleague of mine at the Brookings Institution. He gave one of the lectures here, I think it was in February or sometime in this calendar year. I really admire Richard. I think he is a brilliant communicator and a very thoughtful thinker. Richard wrote a book called Of Boys and Men. And I have to be honest, it was surprising to me. Richard pulled together a lot of really compelling data showing ways that boys growing up and men in adulthood are falling behind, and in ways that we really need to adjust as a society. I agree with a lot of his discussion. I had the opportunity to moderate a discussion with him at Brookings in DC. And I'll be honest with you, Richard and I agree with a lot of things, and I still think there are some areas that women still need a lot of support. This is a lecture. I had this exchange with him. It sparked a lot of interest, and I haven't had the chance to pull my thoughts together, which is yes, Richard, I agree with you. There are a lot of ways we need to better support boys and men, and now I'm also going to give the complimentary lecture about why I think we also need to, there's some real pain points still for women. This is really with respect as well to Richard, because I think very highly of him. And one of the things I think Richard does extremely well is he brings the personal into his discussion. I listened to his lecture that he gave to you. He says this in almost all of his interviews, and I really admire this about him. He says why he wrote the book. Why did he notice that boys and men were falling behind? And Richard brought the fact that he has 3 sons and their experience being a father of 3 boys, and also, frankly, being a man as well. And at first I felt a little bit guilty, because it made me think, my gosh, I've spent so many years championing the cause of women and girls, I didn't notice that boys and men were falling behind. So I felt really grateful that Richard, because of his life experience, his lived experience, noticed something that I didn't notice and put together brilliant research that's raising a lot of awareness. So it made me reflect a little bit for this presentation, why do I care so much about women at work? So I asked myself the same question. There is a little bit of a theme of 3 children. So I'm one of 3 girls. Richard has 3 sons. I'm one of 3 daughters. And this is a picture, a very embarrassing picture of me growing up with my grandmother. My grandmother was a amazing woman. She helped raise us in Buffalo, New York. My grandmother immigrated to America from Ireland at the age of 16. She came with a 4th grade education, a lot of dignity and a lot of love. And her job, her only paid work when she first arrived, was she was a domestic worker. She cooked, she took care of children for a wealthy family in Chicago. And that was the end of my grandmother's career. She ended up having 3 kids. She was an amazing mother. She was an incredible grandmother. And my grandmother's opportunities in work were really limited by the era she was born, her educational opportunities, and some cultural influences. My mom, her daughter, was a teacher. So my mom went to college in Chicago. She got a master's as well. She was a teacher most of my upbringing. And she was brilliant at it, and she loved being a teacher. But when my mom watched her 3 daughters enter their workforce, I work in public policy. I have a younger sister who's far more talented than me. She's an epic writer. She went to the best writing programs in the country, and she's this just extraordinary writer. And my older sister works in marketing. My mom did reflect, like maybe in a different era, in a different set of opportunities, she maybe wouldn't have been a teacher. She mentioned she could have been a journalist or something else. And for my mom, there were a lot of cultural expectations in terms of going into teaching, and she needed a career that allowed her not to work when we were young. She had a more traditional approach to parenting. And so growing up, I had this sense of, work as a woman really sort of depended on a lot of factors and has changed a lot over the decades. The picture to the right, my first career was in international development. I spent a lot of time in developing countries. This is a photo that I took in Liberia in a village. I had the opportunity to work for President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who's the first woman president of Africa. I spent a lot of time in India as well, did a project on poverty that put me in a lot of villages talking to young girls and women. And if any of you work in international development, you'll realize that the issues facing women are just particularly extreme. And so, this is a woman who, in a village, had very few economic opportunities. And so it was something that I became very aware of, was sort of the issue of gender. And then this picture from the middle, going to Caitlin's generous introduction, when I had the opportunity in the pandemic to interview a lot of frontline essential workers, I was moved by all the stories that I heard. But there was something really particular to me in hearing from low-wage frontline workers. These are 3 of the workers I got to know the best, that I talked to for years and featured in a lot of my writing. There was something about hearing this particular sacrifices and challenges of low-wage women who were trying to raise a family. And they were single moms, single grandparents, and the challenges they faced were just something that really stuck with me. And finally, I don't have a picture because I don't like to put pictures of my children on the internet, and this is apparently going to be live streamed. The final thing I'd say is that I am now a mother of 3 children. I have an 8-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And the experience of being a working person as a mother and as a parent has been surprising and really moving to me, but it has also helped shape my understanding of some of the ways that being a worker and a woman and a mother is a particular situation. So before we get to the present and future, I want to do a quick 2-second overview of Claudia Goldin. Is anyone familiar with Claudia Goldin from Harvard? Yes. Claudia just won the Nobel Prize in Economics. She's the first woman to ever win it on her own. If you don't know Claudia's work, she's one of my favorite economists. She's a labor economist, has written amazing books. This is someone from the Swedish Academy did a little cartoon that summarized a little bit of her research. She has this fabulous book called Career and Family that came out about 2 years ago. Highly recommend it. It was so good I read it in a weekend. And she basically looks at the last 100 years of work, focusing on college-educated women. And what she found is she had 5 clusters of women. And essentially, we've come so far in 100 years when we think of work and women. It's really only the most recent generation, just before mine, where it became mainstream to go to college, get a degree, have a career, and not just a job, and have a family. Previously, about 100 years ago, if a woman was going to go to college, she probably wasn't going to get married and she wasn't going to have children. Later on, when more women went and got bachelor's degrees, they maybe worked, but it was typically a job that they could leave to raise children and then go back to, but there was really no sense of a career. It was sort of teaching or social work, something you can move in and out of. It's really a more modern phenomenon that someone like me, standing in front of you, who went to college, went to graduate school, I have a full career and I have a family. This combination is really a modern phenomenon, and it's helped by these things like expanding education. The pill was a huge thing that has allowed women to control their fertility and then lean into their career, and sort of societal change. So while I'm going to talk about some of the challenges, I just want to acknowledge we've come a long way and there's a lot to celebrate. Okay, so I'm a former rower, so I think about tailwinds and headwinds. What I mean by tailwinds are things that are like going well. That's the wind is behind us and we are able to move forward faster. So I'm going to talk about 3 positive things that are happening right now when it comes to women at work, and then I'm going to go into 3 headwinds. So headwinds are not good. These are the challenges we face. So the first thing I want to say is a surprise. If you'd asked me 2 or 3 years ago whether this would be my slide, I would say absolutely not. If you can put yourself back to, the first year of the pandemic when there were so many headlines about a she session. I'm sure that was an issue here in Las Vegas, that some of the job losses were disproportionately borne by women. Child care centers shut down, schools shut down. Does anyone here have children at home that were, yes, okay, so Caitlin knows my pain. Any working mother who was trying to work when their children didn't have school, I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old who had virtual school and no daycare. It was really, really challenging. So I think there was a lot of rightful attention in the pandemic to the challenges of women, both women losing their jobs in large numbers because women were overrepresented in the industries that shut down, such as hospitality. And second, the challenges of being a mother. So many women just had to opt out because it was so difficult. I have this brilliant colleague at Brookings named Lauren Bauer. She's in the Hamilton Project, which is, if you don't know it, is a really wonderful policy-oriented part of our economic studies program. Lauren did some fantastic research recently that has very surprising findings. In fact, the New York Times just did a big a feature on this. She found that the labor force recovery, we know the shortage of workers, big issue in a lot of industries. She found doing some recent, I think it was census data or BLS data, that surprisingly, the group that is leading the charge of the recovery, that's returning to work in the largest numbers, that's helping us recover, it's prime age women. Prime age is in their sort of prime age of working. And it's not just women, it's mothers of young children. And that's a really, really surprising finding. This is a little bit hard to read, but this green line at the bottom is working mothers with very young children, so before kindergarten. And you can see this is actually the highest it's ever been, which is a pretty remarkable achievement. Up there, you can also see that sort of prime age women and young children, the labor force participation is up a lot. This is something to celebrate, not only for the economy, we need workers. I have colleagues at Brookings Metro who are talking about chips manufacturing, semiconductor industry, this huge infrastructure bill that we have. In all sectors, not just in the sectors we think of as being sort of women-dominated sectors, we need workers, and we need women to be able to go to work that want to go to work. So it's a really remarkable achievement that we have this labor force participation, and there's an interesting reason why. I'm curious if anyone would be able to guess. So come up with your guess in your head of why, and let me see if you can get it. Did anyone guess that? Okay, great. So it turns out that Lauren's research has identified, there's lots of things. There's a tight labor market, wages are workers are in demand. I would give some credit to the federal government for making sure the childcare industry did not collapse. A really big factor in this is that when we think about that labor force participation, it was really college-educated women. And it's because college-educated women have the highest access to telework. And it's those workers who have the access to work remotely who've been able to go back into the workforce in numbers that they wouldn't have without something like this. There's a downside to this, especially for a city like Las Vegas, because you can see this is it's very unequal access to remote work. It's something that I, as a privileged office worker, I'm very fortunate that several days a week I'm able to work from home. And as a working mother, it makes my life so much easier when I get a call that I forgot something, or there's no diapers at daycare, or someone's sick. It's so much easier to be able to manage the home front when I have some flexibility in my schedule. And it turns out that mothers across the country have felt the same way. It's a reality that workers of color, workers with less education are far less likely to have a benefit like this. Okay, second tailwind is one that Richard covered really well, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. It's just I want to say I agree with you, Richard. Women are just dominating on college campuses. The presence of women on college campuses is not a new thing. This has been going on for a few decades, but it's really striking. This is some data from the Pew Research Center. They did some great work on this. Right now, not even just for younger workers, but just across the entire economy, women outpace men, which is fairly remarkable because that includes some very older workers before women were really going to college in higher numbers. And then, of course, when we look at sort of more recent graduates, women outnumber men on college campuses. While this is a positive for women, I think this is definitely a challenge as well for society. Richard has been very eloquent in pointing out the ways in which this is not ideal, that men are not attending college in greater numbers. But it does illustrate a strength for women in terms of how they're preparing for their future. I grabbed this from UNLV. I know this is an issue here on campus as well. The third point, and Richard did talk a little bit about this in his book, the thing that I think that is to celebrate is that in a lot of career fields that we think of as typically women are very underrepresented, certainly my mom's generation, if not even when I was going to school, women are now the majority in terms of college. So women are now the majority in medical school, in law school, and in some STEM degrees. There's a lot of gaps in STEM. But STEM overall, women have increased their participation. I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal last week saying that at 5 of the top business schools for MBA, women are now 50%, which is a big achievement. There's some gaps, but I think it's striking that when you look, I think the takeaway, and Claudia Golden wrote about this in her book, you can see now with your generation, I'm looking at the students here, there's not an ambition gap. I would say that women are very, very ambitious, and they're going into a lot of occupations that are higher paid, more competitive, and historically have been dominated by men. Okay, so here are some things that are not going so well. So here are some headwinds that I'm concerned about. The first, which I have to say is where I quibble most with Richard in his book. Richard did not note this in his chapter on work. Women are very much overrepresented in the lowest paying jobs in the economy. And I think this is one of the pain points that really has to be addressed. I put up here just a handful of the most common low-paid jobs where women are dominant. And I also grabbed some data from Oxfam showing that in Nevada, it's even worse than in the rest of the country when you look at the overrepresentation of women compared to men in low-wage jobs. Nevada is the blue, so this is women versus men, and you can see that the gap is much worse than the rest of the country. I think there's a lot of reasons for this. One is that, I just want to point out a few more stats. What's striking to me is that even in occupations that are low wage that are similar, it's the female-dominated occupations that are often paid less. So if you take a maid or a housekeeper, she's paid about 20% less than a janitor, which does like pretty similar work. There's some data, there's some academic evidence that suggests that when women move into male-dominated fields, it tends to suppress the wage, and the reverse is also true. There is also care. This is a space that I'm doing some work in. There's some evidence and some data to suggest that the kind of occupations that are primarily about caring for others, I have some of the examples here, childcare workers, nursing assistants, home health aides, that the main work there is about caring for others. This is a skill set that society just simply does not value as much as other occupations. There's a lot of sort of sexism, racism, but also just outdated notions of whether or not this is actually work. Something that's striking as someone who sends my kid to daycare, I can tell you that childcare workers are really talented, very hardworking, real workers. They are in the bottom 2% of the wage distribution. Parking lot attendants make more than childcare workers, which is sort of phenomenal when you think about the human capital they're forming, the complexity of that job, and the fact that we're trusting our most cherished loved ones to these workers. This is a real challenge that some of the work that women have dominated in is simply not valued, and unfortunately the wages reflect that. Second headwind is that the gender pay gap still persists. So there's some really interesting data from the Department of Labor, and I'll recite it because I don't have it on the slide, that women are 2/3 of workers who make less than $30,000, but less than 1/3 of workers who make over $100,000. So there's a real, women are clustered in lower paying jobs. They're underrepresented in the highest paying jobs. But even within the same education level or the same types of occupation, women still earn less than men. So as you can see here, women earn typically about 82, 83% of men's wages. This holds at all levels of education. Interestingly, it's the most advanced degrees where you see the greatest disparity, but it's still, there's a disparity at all levels. And this has been persistent over time. It's getting a little bit better, which is good news, and that's something Richard has noted. But it's been pretty stubborn. I mean, this is from 1982. This is like right around the time I was born. You're still seeing a lot of persistent pay gaps. And what's striking here is that this pay gap is for younger workers. It's getting a little bit better. So you see in 1997, it was about 86, women would earn about 86 cents to the dollar to a man's dollar. Now we're at about 92. That's not a huge amount of change, but it's a little bit better. But you'll see that the pay gap is less for younger workers than older workers. And I'm going to ask you to guess in your head why you think that is. So come up with your guesses. This is Claudia Goldin again, the amazing labor economist who just won the Nobel Prize. Again, there's this, I don't know who he is, but some very talented illustrator in the Nobel world made an illustration of something called the motherhood penalty. And Claudia has done just exceptional writing trying to unpack why is it. She focuses primarily on college-educated women, which is a slightly different story. But Claudia has done amazing research to try to understand why is it that mothers earn so much less than fathers. And I wish that this drawing actually had a backpack as the first step, because I would have put it even earlier in college. Women and men, typically, especially college educated workers, typically coming out of college, they earn the same as men. There's really not much of a gender pay gap. And that continues, in early career for women. What Claudia has found is that she really sees the pay gap start about 2 years after working women, this is educated women, highly educated women, have a baby. So it's not immediately, it's when sort of the family responsibilities take hold. Richard Reeves has a great quote in his book, and he says that for working women, having a baby is the economic equivalent of getting hit by a meteorite, and it barely touches men. And the data supports this. For working fathers, there's no real wage penalty to having a child. For working women, there is. And really, you start seeing that gender pay gap widen at the time that women become mothers. Claudia has some really fascinating insights into why. She has this whole theory around greedy jobs. She has this idea, she really looked at the really high-performing, high-wage sectors like law, consulting, medicine, finance. And what she found was that often college-educated women often marry other college-educated men. That's just sort of how our country sorts. And what she found was that often there's not much difference in ambition. They sort of, maybe she gave some good anecdotes in her book. Maybe sort of husband and wife work in the same law firm, the same accounting firm, or the same, fancy pants finance firm. And what happens is these jobs are greedy jobs. They really prize workers who are willing to go really long hours. And in fact, your pay doesn't go up linearly. If you're willing to do the really crazy hours, you get paid a lot extra. So what happens is when you have a couple where one person takes the greedy job and you have kids, it means that it's really tough to have two people in greedy jobs. Even with childcare, and I can say this from my own experience, my husband has a very greedy job in the public sector. He has a crazy schedule. It's really tough for two people to both have greedy jobs. So what happens is it actually sort of makes sense for the family to optimize family wealth by allowing one member of the couple to go for it. Maybe they're on the partner track at the law firm. Maybe they're going for the long hours in the finance company. But it then makes sense for another member of the couple to take the more flexible job. So what happens is it's often the man takes the greedy job, and it makes sense for the family to optimize that the woman takes the more flexible job. That's Claudia's theory. She has some really brilliant ideas for how you can restructure work to make them less greedy. She showed how medicine has done that, veterinary offices, pharmacies, and in jobs where they've restructured to make them less greedy, to make it so that if you only work 40 hours or 35 hours, you're not penalized financially, women flock to those fields. So her call to action is to actually make jobs less greedy. One thing that I found really striking is the Pew Research Center has done some really interesting polling to understand attitudes. My big takeaway from this poll, they're asking working parents what they feel a lot of pressure about. And when I read this, I read that there's almost no difference in ambition with how much pressure you feel to be really good at your career. The really big difference is that working mothers feel a lot of pressure in addition to be great at their job. They feel a lot of pressure to focus on their responsibilities at home. And that, I think, is where you see this crunch, where you have working mothers with a lot of education feeling like they can't juggle work and family. It's because societally we still expect women, and a lot of, as a working mom, I feel it myself, a lot of us feel a lot of pressure to also tend to the home. Third headwind is the fact that our country does not invest in an infrastructure that would make this all possible. This is a photo of a New York Times op-ed that I wrote with my brilliant Brookings Metro colleague, Martha Ross. She's a senior fellow. We wrote a piece for the New York Times talking about the fact that we didn't actually write this. This is a little secret about New York Times op-eds. You write a draft and they make it sound a lot better. Someone I don't know, some editor at the New York Times made my writing so much better, so I don't know who I'm crediting. Someone took my words and made it so much better and called it the invisible scaffolding that makes work possible is care. is the care infrastructure. And in America, we do not invest. We do not have a sufficient care infrastructure. And I'm going to walk a little bit through this. So childcare. I'm a little hesitant to talk about this because we have young people here and I do not want to scare you from having children. I have another slide later that shows we have a demographic problem. We don't have enough, population, so we need a lot of fertility. So do not let this scare you. Childcare is wildly expensive in this country. It is absolutely insane. I looked up the stats for Nevada, so I'm just going to tell you where you are. For an infant, so like a baby, you are $13,000, so you're that orange. That's the cost per year, a little over $13,000 a year. This is the average. For a toddler, you're the most expensive, you're $12,000. And for preschool, like a 4-year-old, you're at $11,000 a year. I will say I live in the most expensive city in America for childcare. I spend $2,400 a month on daycare for one child. It's absolutely insane. And the Treasury under Janet Yellen has done some excellent policy research, some papers, pointing out how unsustainable this is. They call this a market failure. We're asking people at a time in their life where they're early in their career, they do not have the liquidity to spend an exorbitant amount of money that they cannot afford on childcare when all of society has an interest in this. We need people to work who want to work. This is not a judgment. If a mother prefers to be at home, I think that's wonderful. There are a lot of people who want to work and they find this totally unsustainable. And from the perspective of the childcare provider, these are businesses that often have a 1% profit margin. Their biggest cost is labor. There's no economies of scale. There's no way with technology to make this more efficient. And actually, the workers are getting paid nothing. So families can't afford it. Workers are barely able to scrape by. Most of them are on public assistance. And providers are barely staying afloat. So the Treasury Department put out this great piece making the case, which I agree with, why it's a public good for the public sector to invest and make care more affordable, make it high quality, make it something people can access at a level that they can actually afford, which is not what we're seeing here. This is not affordable rates of childcare. Something I'm really disappointed about is that the Biden administration went really bold and they proposed something called Build Back Better. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Build Back Better, but at the same time that we were proposing all these really go-for-broke, transformative, historic investments in physical infrastructure, clean energy, we did semiconductors. At the same time, there was also supposed to be social infrastructure as well. This was part of the package, and I laid out a little bit of what it was proposing, and I'm unfortunately giving away with the red X to suggest what happened to this, what happened to these proposals. This Build Back Better was going to be the biggest, most transformative investment in our care infrastructure. It was going to put over $200 billion into childcare. That was about affordability, accessibility, long-term care. We have a huge problem with elder care. People who are qualified for Medicaid can't get access to someone to come into their home. People want to age in place. This $400 billion would shore up home and community-based services and provide wage increases for underpaid workers. Paid family leave, we do not have a system in this country when you have a baby or someone is sick that you have paid leave. And pre-K, which I'm very passionate about as someone whose children are in full-time pre-K 3 and pre-K 4. We do not have a national system of this. It's very much a state-level initiative. This was supposed to be very transformative. Senator Manchin was not interested. It was a lot of potential. It didn't pass. So we went big and historic on a lot of physical infrastructure, a lot of occupations that are hard hats and are predominantly male, and this very important infrastructure that would be supporting a lot of families, a lot of working women, and a lot of women in these sectors got nothing. This is part of what I'm doing now at Brookings, as I'm working on a lot of research on how we can make this care infrastructure actually happen. There's a lot of scholars across Brookings, especially in economic studies, that are interested in this topic. So stay tuned. I hope that Brookings can do a lot more to keep this alive. Now the future of work. So I talked about 3 headwinds, 3 tailwinds. I want to look out into the future and talk about 2 emerging trends. And for both of these, it's a very mixed picture for women. So I don't have definitive answers. I just want to raise 2 big trends that are coming and discuss a little bit about the ways that will impact women at work. The first is demographic change. So I find this a mind-blowing graph. This is showing projected population growth by 3 different cohorts of age. So the green line is all of you, 18 to 64. You can see here that there's almost no projected growth. There's not very much population growth coming from prime age people. The blue line is 65 and older. So people who are reaching retirement age, they are projected to double in size by 2060, but actually a lot sooner than that. And the really shocking number is the yellow. The yellow line shows the population that's 85 and older. And this is a really important demographic because when people reach the age of 85, this is where we see dementia, we see Alzheimer's, we see a ton of healthcare needs. That's just a mind-boggling growth. And you can see that we're really close to that happening. Does anyone have an idea of why that's happening when it is? Baby boomers. So there was a really great Washington Post visualization that always makes me think of an analogy. Whenever the baby boomers are this massive generation, they're so huge. Whatever age the baby boomers are is the biggest age cohort. So imagine deciles of population stacked on top of each other from youngest to oldest. The way I think about the baby boomers moving up is like imagine a snake that swallowed a big ball. And like, as it moved down, like whatever is the baby boomers is that bulge. You know, like whatever age the baby boomers are, they're this massive population bulge. So the baby boomers are about to hit 85 in like 4 years, I believe. My mom is just around that age, so I'm very aware of it. And our baby boomers are living longer. They're going to pose a huge challenge to this country when it comes to healthcare needs, but also care needs as well. And the stat that I find so mind-boggling is today the ratio of adults in their prime age, 18 to 64, to over 85 is 31 to 1. By the time we get to 2060, but a heck of a lot sooner, it's 12 to 1. So imagine the number of families, including my own, who are going to have an aging relative who's going to live well past 85, who's going to have a lot of care needs. There's a lot of challenges that this brings up and opportunities, and it's really going to affect women. The first being the care responsibilities. In this country, we do not have a broadly accessible plan for long-term care. Medicare is age. Everyone has access to Medicare for health needs when you're older. That doesn't include long-term care. And when I say long-term care, imagine you have a grandmother who has Alzheimer's and she needs somebody to care for her every day. She cannot live alone. Often in the past, people have gone into nursing homes, especially since the pandemic. There's a strong preference to age in place, to age in your own home. These people need somebody to support them as they're getting older, and they could go for many years. We do not have a public program that just funds people to get access to care. What we have is Medicaid. Medicaid does provide for long-term care. It's income adjusted, which means in order to qualify for Medicaid to finance your long-term care, you basically have to have $2,000 in assets and no more. So you basically have to spend down everything you have in order to get access to Medicaid, which means families who are going to have aging relatives, the vast majority are not going to have some kind of public benefit to finance the cost of care. That means it's going to fall to family members and a lot of unpaid caregivers to carry the load unless we change this as a country. We can decide it's just very costly, and we're already having a lot of challenges with solvency of Social Security. So this is a huge challenge that's coming. It's only a few years away. A lot of the data and evidence suggests that right now, in families where there is some caregiving need, a sick person or an aging relative, it's primarily women that take on those burdens. It's usually, they call it the like oldest daughter or the dutiful daughter approach. There are plenty of men. I think it's something like maybe 40% of unpaid caregivers are men, so I don't mean to suggest it's all women. But the data so far suggests that more often than not, it's daughters and women who take on those caregiving responsibilities. This has huge impact on people's ability to work. So any employers who are thinking about their workforce in the future, this is going to be very disruptive to your workforce. And it's really challenging for families because there's a lot like, how can you keep your job and still look after an aging parent? So this is a really big challenge, and it's one that I don't think we're talking about. We talk about child care responsibilities, but care for this aging population is going to be a really big deal. On the flip side, it also creates huge opportunities for occupations. I pulled this from BLS. the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the jobs that are projected to add the most number of jobs. It's not the percent growth rate, it's the total aggregate number of jobs that are projected to be added over the next 10 years. And a lot of these are healthcare jobs because the needs of our country, we are going to need so much healthcare in the future, in part because of this aging population. Registered nurses, nurse practitioners, medical assistants, medical and health service managers, home health and personal care aides. Disproportionately, those jobs right now employ women. So these are actually really good jobs with a big asterisk I'm going to talk about in a second. These are really great jobs, and they're projected to grow. They're all along the education range as well. You know, medical assistants, these are more accessible jobs for women, going all the way up to registered nurses make about $90,000 a year as an average. These are excellent jobs. So the opportunities with healthcare are there. Their opportunities are here in Las Vegas as well, and I want to commend Tom Kaplan. I know he's one of the many philanthropists who are involved in UNLV. UNLV has a medical school now. There's so many opportunities for this region to invest in the healthcare sector to create these kind of good jobs, and that women will also benefit from. My asterisk is that the single biggest job, the greatest number of jobs that are projected to be added in the next 10 years are home health aides. This is the reason why I'm doing a project at Brookings trying to make these better jobs. They are the job of the future. I don't know if anyone's had any experience with home health aides or are familiar with what they do. They're amazing. These are the workers that go into the home of people with disabilities or they're elderly, and they care for them. They're not doctors, they're not medical staff. They help them do their daily needs. Like they make sure they're taking their medicine, they're helping them get dressed. They're someone who might be living alone, they are their person who's caring for them. It's such a noble and important job. It's such a human job. It's one that cannot be done by technology. It is not getting automated. The problem with this, and it's something like 90% women have these jobs. These are very much, it's a predominantly workers of color, a lot of immigrants. These are terribly paid jobs, extremely low paid jobs. They often have no benefits. They're hard on the body. They're very difficult, grueling jobs that are not compensated. And I think this is a huge challenge, that the biggest job of our future is a low quality job that the society needs, but we are not investing in it. The best way to raise wages in this sector, the biggest payer of home health aides is Medicaid. And Medicaid is financed by a combination of states and the federal government. This is a policy choice. States decide how much home health aides are paid. They set a reimbursement rate that dictates exactly how much a home health aide could be paid. This is a policy choice. If we decide as a state or as a country that we value these workers, it's possible to raise those wages. And I want to commend Nevada, because Nevada is one of the states that have recently decided to significantly raise wages for home health aides. I think it's like a $5 an hour went from about $11 minimum wage to almost $16. That's a really, really big difference. I'm spending my Thursday afternoon interviewing some of the home care workers who are going to benefit from this pay raise to understand what it's going to mean in their life. It's really wonderful that Nevada did this. They did it in a bipartisan way. And the legislature passed this, and I just want to say Nevada is really leading the way on a job that has historically been extremely low wage, and Nevada is raising the standards of it. And that's a model. I'm going to be writing something to tell this story. Hopefully more states will follow. Okay, now is a really interesting topic. I'm starting to work on it, and I have a lot more questions than I have answers right now. This slide, about 4 years ago, before I joined Brookings, 5 years ago, I led research on workers in technology. This was pre-generative AI. And I used to talk about the ways that technology, automation, robots, software automation, sort of basic AI, how is that changing work? And I show these pictures because on the left, we have switchboard operators, and on the right, we have men in sort of manufacturing. And the sort of recent history of automation was that, the kind of technology we've seen over the last few decades has, it's what we called skill biased. The technology we have seen, this is two good examples, has hollowed out the middle of the economy of workers. So in the middle for this is like women in clerical roles, like switchboard operators, men in production roles in manufacturing. These were middle jobs that provided a good living, a middle-class living, and you didn't need more than a high school degree. Automation decimated the middle, and it led to this polarization where technology was skill biased, meaning higher educated, higher wage workers were boosted by technology. Think about computers. Those of us who sit in front of a computer were much more productive, were more effective. We had an increase in the number of high wage jobs and an increase in the number of low wage jobs and a hollowing out of the middle. What's interesting to me as a researcher who's, again, very attuned to women is I find it fascinating that women have escaped this. I mean, if you look at some graphs, there was a lot of shrinking in the last few decades, especially like the 1960s, 1970s, of clerical jobs, just like there were manufacturing jobs. But we don't talk about the loss of clerical jobs as some, horrific thing that scarred our country. We do for manufacturing. And there's a few reasons for that. I think the story of women in the past of automation, the recent history, is one of resilience. Women, there were a lot of displacement out of middle skill jobs at the same time that women in droves were going to college. Women were going to get higher education, and so as these middle skill jobs were eroding, they were moving into management jobs, healthcare jobs, really moving up the value chain because they'd been really held back from going to college, so they went to college. You really didn't see much scarring because women were moving into better opportunity. That's not the case for men. And this is something that Richard touched on a little bit in his book. I mean, the recent history of automation is devastating for men. And it's actually been devastating for our country because when manufacturing jobs went away, what replaced them was less identity, less meaning, less community, and certainly less wages. And at that same time that these middle wage jobs were going away for people who didn't have a high school degree, men were not flocking to college in higher numbers. They were staying steady. So we lost something very valuable. I call it almost like a sticky job. There's a real lesson in there, the loss of meaningful jobs that are good jobs that people really want, that give them something and good wages, and what replaces them, for a lot of men, it was warehousing and fast food. This is sort of low-wage jobs replaced manufacturing. And we see the kind of discontent, like super unhappiness, like a political backlash, deep unhappiness. It's been really bad. So the past of automation, women have been really resilient. So my question is sort of, what is it going to look like in the future as we face new waves of automation? Before I do this. Okay, so I want to confess. 5 years ago, I did a lot of lectures, and I was on PBS talking about women in the future of work. And what I said was true at the time. It's no longer true. That what I was most worried about, this is pre-generative AI, was that technology was putting at risk, was most at risk women and low-wage workers. That the kind of automation that was sort of replacing cashiers in grocery stores and, and were eliminating some more clerical work, it was really sort of the most vulnerable were people with the least education. And there was a sense that sort of machines were good at replacing predictable routine tasks. So your data entry, that's very predictable and routine, that could go away. Production, you're on a factory line, that's sort of routine and predictable. Some fast food, maybe making a salad at Sweetgreen, which is now being replaced by a robot, that's predictable. What we were saying as sort of how to future-proof yourself was to do things machines couldn't do. Be more human, be creative, be empathetic, get an advanced degree, go to college. That the more educated you were, the more you were less routine, less predictable, the less risk you were to automation. And that at the time was the best information I had. And this is what that looked like. This is a McKinsey, this is from 2023. This is still primarily the old story of automation. So the kinds of things that were sort of going away were office support, routine, predictable. That's like software automation, some customer service, a bit of food service. But then look, we have all this growth in the high-paid stuff and the healthcare. This is the story we just talked about, healthcare. And the stuff that was going away was more routine and predictable. But the thinking was, if you have a BA, if you have an advanced degree, if you do more cognitive work, you're empathetic, you're creative, I use that term creative all the time, you're safe from the risks of technology. Well, has anyone here used ChatGPT? things have changed a lot since generative AI has been introduced. And as someone who's now doing a new project on this, I can say the research community doesn't yet have all the answers, but what we're seeing is a very different type of technology. This is from McKinsey. They took their old report about the risks of automation that was pre-generative AI. So he's using the same lingo I was doing about what was most at risk of automation. The movement in blue is now that you add in generative AI like ChatGPT, this is where the difference is in automation risk. And this is a little hard to totally see, but it's the high-skilled jobs, the really highly educated cognitive jobs, where you see the biggest change. So the number in the middle is like, what's the difference in percent? So you can see STEM professionals, teachers, creatives, huge one. I used to give lectures all the time saying, you should be creative, don't be routine and predictable. You know, creative, this is a way to be human. Creatives are now, generative AI is posing a really big disruption to the creative field. Business and legal law is a really big one. Goldman Sachs predicts that the legal field is one of the most likely for disruption. Managers, I mean, this is really, it's a completely different form of technology. You can see that there's like, you know, there's still like some of these other areas that already had some automation potential, you'll see a little bit more. So for instance, office support, you know, that was already one that the Bureau of Labor Statistics already predicts that those jobs are going to be shrunk. And when I say office support, think like a payroll assistant, a human resource assistant, a secretary or administrative assistant. That is actually where the greatest source of job displacement is predicted to come from with current technology. Generative AI exacerbates that a little bit, but that was already happening. I think the key thing I want to point out here is that this is a new ballgame. Generative AI is very different from previous forms of technology, and we're still grappling with what this is going to look like. I love this. This is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to try to explain this as best I can. The ILO, which is the International Labor Organization, has what my colleague Mark Muir and I think is one of the best papers. It's still, from a research perspective, we're all a little bit guessing what exactly is going to happen with generative AI. Most of what we have right now when people are trying to guess is exposure. So there's been a lot of studies that show what kind of occupations are exposed to AI. And by that, what they do is they take an occupation and they figure out what the discrete tasks are in a job. And they put a percent likelihood that current version of generative AI could do that task. So I have a job as a researcher. There's a lot of tasks to my job. And so they would look at a composite of my job and say, of all the tasks that I do, can the current form of generative AI do my job? And they get sort of like exposure. But like within exposure, we're not sure if like exposure could mean like AI is going to help you do your job, or it might like take your job. So there's augmentation. So a lot of people who use generative AI are going to be better at their job. They're going to be more productive. It's going to augment them. And by augment, I'll give you an example. The first slide, when I had a picture of women, I used generative AI for that. I talked to ChatGPT-4 a whole bunch with brainstorming about this presentation. I asked it specific questions. I asked it to give me an outline. I didn't use it. But I asked it, I asked a question. I asked it to summarize some things. Like, it didn't do my job. I'm not at risk right now of ChatGPT-4 doing this presentation, but it made me a little bit more productive. It was a tool that I used, and it sort of augmented me un poquito. So there's a lot of people, there's a lot of excitement that generative AI is going to be a technology that's going to really unlock productivity. And let me give you the positive example. And this is what we say for augmentation is the blue. Okay, so these are, and I put the blue here. This is what some occupations that the International Labor Organization thinks will be augmented with this version of ChatGPT-4. So augmented might mean that I'm a doctor or I'm a nurse, and my main job is I am helping patients, but I have to do a lot of paperwork, and it's a real drag. And generative AI is just going to help me be more productive and efficient in doing a bunch of paperwork that I didn't want to do. I am a writer. I'm a copywriter, and I talked to a grant writer who is using generative AI to whip out drafts really quickly. And she has generative AI pump out a draft, and she edits it, and she saves her 80% of her time. So she is augmented. She's not at this point displaced, she's augmented. There's a lot of ways this technology is going to make us more efficient and more productive and help us do our job faster. Computer programmers, I've been talking with a lot of students who've used Copilot, different things. You can use tools, if you're a computer programmer, to do code quicker, to check your code, to make it better, to learn it faster. So there's a lot of ways this technology is going to augment us, and I personally find this thrilling. I think there's some exciting aspects of generative AI that we can't even imagine all the ways it's going to make us more productive. What the ILO did is they tried to figure out when an occupation has some exposure to AI, can they figure out if it's a risk of getting replaced, or is it augmentation? Is it a good story or is it a bad story? And you can imagine on replaced. So I was just in LA this weekend interviewing Hollywood screenwriters who just went on strike for 5 months over AI. They're very worried that they're going to be fully replaced. If the technology gets good enough, there's no reason to have staff writers. It's just going to get pumped out. So there's a fear of replacement, that the technology can do our job. And there's this really exciting possibility that we're going to have like a research assistant in our pocket, an assistant. We're going to learn things faster. We're going to be really efficient. So like we're trying to figure out, this is like the whole research community is trying to figure this out. ILO has a really cool methodology of doing this. What they did was they looked at within an occupation and all the tasks, what's the average of the tasks that can be completed by this version of generative AI, and what's the standard deviation? And the reason why the standard deviation matters is, imagine you are a very highly skilled professional and your main work is you're a doctor and you're treating patients, and some portion of your work is paperwork. Maybe your average is like, I don't know, maybe 30% of your hours can be automated, of your activities, but you have a high standard deviation because some of your work absolutely cannot be automated. Their hypothesis is that having a somewhat low mean and a high standard deviation means you're less likely to get replaced. It means you're going to be augmented. You're going to be able to pass on some aspect of your job and make yourself productive, but you have enough that you're going to do yourself that they're not going to replace you. So I'm just showing you all this because the kinds of jobs that at this stage of development of ChatGPT and generative AI, the kinds of jobs that look like they will get augmented are highly skilled jobs. And this is just, I don't know if you guys can read it, but this is just a sample of lots of different types of job: building architects, musician landscape architects, dietitians, computer network, photographers. The kinds of jobs that right now are predicted for replacement and automation are not highly skilled jobs. They're mostly clerical support roles. Women are vastly overrepresented in the jobs that right now are predicted to be displaced. However, because women are now exceeding men on BAs, they're actually potentially also likely to be the ones that could be augmented. The thing the reason why there's many unknowns is that whole green area is loads of jobs that the researchers don't yet know which direction it's going to go. Is it going to be augmented? Is it going to be displaced? We just honestly don't know. And I think there's a lot of reasons why we don't yet know how this is going to play out. We don't know how good this technology is. We don't know the spirit that's going to be deployed. Are employers looking to, make their workers better and more productive, or are they looking to replace them? I think there's a lot of questions we don't know. But the reason why I'm framing this as an issue for women is right now, McKinsey's estimate is that across all forms of technology and automation, women are 1.5 times more likely than men to be replaced. And the ILO thinks on the blue that women are overrepresented right now, just by a fraction, in who's going to be augmented. So it's really two sides of the story. And I think this really matters for women, and it matters for everybody. But I think because right now they're sort of in both ends. Okay, this is a really silly slide. I want to show you a little bit how quickly this technology is advancing, because everything I just showed you was based on what the technology is today, and what is the likelihood that you're displaced or not based on the technology today. I'm interviewing a lot of creatives. I'm doing this project on generative AI and workers, and I'm starting with the creative industry. And I'm talking to some illustrators, so I wanted to understand how good is this technology. And I heard that DALL-E 3, this image generator from ChatGPT, is brilliant and amazing. So this was my first ever try to make an image. And I had really high expectations. I said, this is going to blow my mind. I asked it to make an image of someone who's kind of looked like me with my 3 kids. a tall redheaded mom with 3 kids, 3 blonde kids, and I gave the ages. And I was ready to be blown away. I was like, drum roll, this is gonna be amazing. And this came out. And my feet look like meat. And there's extra limbs, and there's really creepy faces. And I laughed so hard that my husband came upstairs to find out what was going on, because I said, how can this possibly be? Why am I even worried about generative AI? This is terrible. And I sent it to my colleagues. We all had a big laugh. And then it turns out, I find out, I was not using DALL-E 3. This is DALL-E 1. This was from 2 years ago. And let me show you, I'm embarrassed to admit that I listened to this New York Times tech podcast, and I sent it to the host saying, what are you talking about? DALL-E 3 is not good at all. Look at these pictures. And he kindly let me know I was not using DALL-E 3. So I went back to DALL-E 3, and let me show you, this is a 2-year difference from DALL-E 1 to DALL-E 3. That's the new image. It's not, I still have a beard. There's some problems. There's some facial hair that's not accurate. But this is much more passable. So I'm using this just as an example that this technology is improving lightning fast. The number I keep hearing is 10x. And everything from synthetic voices to the quality of the writing, ChatGPT 3.5 versus ChatGPT 4. Every week there are new advances. This is going so fast. And this is why I'm taking this so seriously. Like those stats, all the stuff I showed you that was so disruptive, that was in what this technology is today. We don't know what it's gonna look like in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. And I just had this wonderful meeting with your colleague who works in machine learning. She agrees with me, I'm not a technologist. We have to take this seriously. It's going to get better and better and better. And when I talk to workers and everything from graphic design to authors to lawyers, there is this sense, copywriters, it's, it can't do my job right now. But the question is, what is it gonna look like when it gets so much better? What happens when this image becomes so good that a lot of people won't feel the need to pay an illustrator? Because in 2 seconds, this comes out. And there's a lot of jobs that are gonna be at risk. There's also a huge amount of potential with this technology, and a lot comes down to how we use it. But I just want to impress upon you every statistic I showed you, which should kind of make you unnerved that technology is changing things. That's the potential today, and this is accelerating so fast. My last slide here is a call to action. President Biden just last week issued an executive order that got a ton of buzz in the technology community. And it was kind of a North Star. It was basically sort of, here are some principles of how we want to make sure generative AI is unveiled. I'm talking about the work aspect. There are huge issues with disinformation, democracy, all sorts of things that are really concerning about generative AI. And I pulled in here the language that the White House included on work. And I love it as a value statement. So I just want to read it. In the workplace itself, AI should not be deployed in ways that undermine rights, worsen job quality, encourage undue worker surveillance, lessen market competition, or cause harmful labor force disruptions. And then it says, we want AI to improve workers' lives, positively augment human work, and help all people safely enjoy the gains and opportunities from technological innovation. This is amazing. If we can imagine a world where this incredible technology is harnessed in a way, think about the possibilities. You guys live in Las Vegas. You have a huge hospitality industry. Many of these jobs are very low waged. Is there a way that generative AI can be used to upskill these jobs, make them more powerful, help people who maybe don't currently access knowledge jobs, give them better writing tools, better capabilities? If we can find ways to harness this technology to allow people to do higher order work, become more productive, entry-level people be able to do much more sophisticated work, we will lower inequality. This could be used in really powerful and exciting ways. It also can be used the opposite. Generative AI absolutely can be used simply to replace people, to replace expertise. And I think this is what is really concerning. Here we are celebrating in this presentation that women have come so far, but really workers have come so far. People at this university are here to get a BA because they want to be educated, they want a career. I think it's safe to say that generative AI is the kind of technology that's going to disrupt careers of people who have a BA, much more so than previous waves of automation, in ways that could be thrilling, in ways that we can't even imagine. Technology creates new opportunities that we can't imagine today. I'm not a pessimist in the sense that I think jobs are going away, but people who have invested a lot of time and expertise in their career are going to suddenly find, some people are going to find that that expertise is devalued because a machine can do it. And I think there's a lot of societal questions about how do we ensure that the designers of this technology, the employers that use it, that society at large is centering this technology on being being a tool for making workers better, as opposed to simply being a tool for suppressing worker rights, suppressing worker voice, and eliminating jobs. And really, that's up to all of us. This is a question that I hope on campus you guys are grappling with. I mean, it's really hard to take this statement from the White House and figure out what you do. Like, what legislation would you pass? What would you regulate? I think employers, I mean, there's going to be a lot of reasons why I think employers are going to want to make their employees more productive, and in some ways that's going to eliminate jobs. What do we do about that? How do you as students navigate a career that's probably going to have some disruption? So I think this is just such a pressing question. I see huge potentials of generative AI for women in particular. I think that there's a lot at stake for women in this, but there's something at stake for everyone. And I think this wave of automation is going to look different than the past. And I don't yet have answers, but I'm excited to be on campus this week because I've talked to so many students about this topic. Everyone has been so engaged and has great ideas. And really, it needs all of us because this is a really powerful technology. And I think it's up to us to shape it. So that is the end. Thank you all for coming out. We're a little short on time, so we have time for probably a
couple of questions from the audience. If you can let me know where you're at, and I'll bring Mike around to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi.
Oh, yep, here. You're right.
I think I did. Oh, is it on? Okay. Sorry. Hi. My question has to do with kind of the larger conversation around solutions. I feel like we're in a really unique political moment where there's like a lot of engagement around like economic issues because of the state of the world and like the engagement from especially our generation. And so like, for example, in 2020, during the primary season for the Democratic nomination, there was a candidate, Andrew Yang, who was bringing up universal basic income as a possible solution for a lot of the changes that are happening in our economy. And he especially brought up care work and unpaid care work and how that could be a possible solution. So I wanted to ask you about your opinion on that. And then another one that has been brought up a lot in current years is a federal jobs guarantee. And I got to talk to some experts on that a few years ago, which was really cool, and so I wanted to know what your thoughts were around those solutions and whether they were too broad and sweeping. Like, what are some of the things that scholars are talking about right now that you're gravitating towards? Well,
first, those are really thoughtful, great questions, and I love that you're so switched on to the presidential debates. My read on the situation right now is that of all the issues with AI, this issue of work is the least partisan. There is no partisan camps right now on this. In fact, Republicans, Democrats across the board are very concerned about this issue of work. There's a lot of like panic right now. And that's a real opening because there isn't this entrenched view. It's going to be much harder for Congress to figure out how to sort of regulate tech companies on other issues. This issue of work is one that across the board everyone is very concerned with. I think you're going to see a lot of talk in the presidential race on this. And I think the big challenge right now, I mean, it's wonderful to work on a topic. Care work is not one where there's not partisan divisions. There's very deep partisan divisions around care. So it's very tricky to navigate. This issue of generative AI in work is not partisan. There's like, right now, there's a lot of interest. I think the challenge is finding really meaningful solutions. It's really, really, really hard to figure out how would you regulate this in a meaningful way? What would you legislate when it came to work? So this is something that we're taking on at Brookings Metro. I'm working very closely with two colleagues of mine, Mark Miro, who's this incredible researcher, as well as Zav Briggs, who's one of my colleagues I admire the most. ZAB is really leading through 2024 with convening all sorts of stakeholders, like the key folks that need to be in the room, employers, workers groups, smart folks, economists, to really grapple with what are the solutions. Because I actually, frankly, this is where I'm coming with some humility. I don't have silver bullet solutions in my back pocket. Short of unions, I actually think that, unfortunately we have very low union coverage, but talking to the Hollywood writers, they are very grateful. They have a union who's trying to negotiate so that the workers get a say over sort of how to deploy the technology. It doesn't just come and wipe them out. 94% of private sector workers are not in union, so that's not a solution at scale. But it's a really hot topic. It's one that I think there's huge interest, but yet not a clear policy agenda that I think meets the challenge. I have looked into the federal jobs guarantee. I did some campaign work for a candidate who was interested. I personally don't think that's a solution yet. I don't think we're actually in a labor shortage right now. So just to be clear, we sort of have a shortage of labor. We don't right now have jobs going away. Generative AI is not wiping out jobs at the moment. I still think we have a lot to do to sort of just, deal with it. I think there's some downsides to federal jobs guarantee. If we get to a place where, generative AI advances so much, there's, and we really, really don't have work, which I have a hard time believing. If we get to that place, I think a lot of things are going to be on the table. A lot of people talk about universal basic income, something like a federal jobs guarantee. I think right now the research is pointing to, at this stage in development, we're really looking at more augmentation than displacement. The question is, where does this go? So I think if we really get to a place where work is decimated, which I hope we never get to, I think there'd be more appetite for sort of more sweeping proposals.
Hi, thank you. My question revolves around, I think that federal level to reach a consensus on AI will probably take a longer time than state. How do you think state level should act, and how should maybe even university can take some actions right now to address this kind of ambiguity? Because I think it's going to take a long time for even a policy to even catch up, and maybe we can use AI to make policies to regulate itself or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I honestly actually had a Maryland state legislature reach out to me last week to give her, what are your solutions, and I had to humbly say I don't yet have them. I don't actually know what the state agenda is yet, to be totally frank. I think historically we talked about things like workforce development, but like who's going to be displaced? We don't actually yet know really who's vulnerable. I mean, when we talk about workforce development, we were thinking of manufacturing workers or displaced people in the middle. We might be talking about people with much more advanced degrees. What do you do with a Hollywood writer? What do you do with a copywriter? What about a graphic designer? It's just a different situation. So I think part of it, I'm just being a little bit humble, and I'm first talking to workers. Mark and I are doing some research on what we think are vulnerable occupations, and then we're going to really be consulting, because this is a different situation, and I'm just having some humility before I sort of write the 6-point policy conclusions. Universities, this is a huge question. Like, what do universities do? How should they be preparing students coming out of university in a world of generative AI? How should you be thinking about your career? How should they be thinking about using this technology in ways that are going to augment you? What kind of debates are you having on campus? I mean, frankly, if I was a professor, I'd be really struggling with figuring out, like, how do I deal with students using ChatGPT-4? I think it's a huge question. I really hope a campus like UNLV leans into this. You have technology, you have professors who understand the technology, you have a public policy program, you have a community that's going to be impacted. I'm sort of been talking with some of the students who are involved in Brookings about hopefully getting involved in some of my research, talking to workers, doing some research. It's a really important topic, and it's going to affect your generation more than anyone else. So I hope it's something that this university really leans into. I have an audience with your president on Thursday morning, so I'm happy to make that suggestion. But it's just really important. So I hope that you engage. I want to make sure I take some questions. Go ahead, sir.
How do you propose to get men back into college?
That is a good question. I mean,
you're the expert.
Well, I did say I'm the expert on like women and the future of work. So that's Richard's job. But I mean, it's super important, and I do think, while I pointed that out as something that's positive for women, it's actually not positive for society if we have such an imbalanced university system, and we do need men to see, they see themselves in university, and the more it becomes more female-dominated, the less hospitable it is. So Richard Reeves is the one who's grappling. He started a new institute on men and boys, so let's leave it to Richard. Yeah.
I want to thank all much for the dialogue. If you'll join me in thanking Molly again for her time.
Thank you, guys.
I know personally we could keep this conversation going for another hour, and I still would be learning new things, and I appreciate that so much. If you have questions that you want to ask Molly, she'll be here for just a little bit afterwards. In the meantime, I want to invite you all to the final talk in our Brookings Scholar Lecture Series this fall, which will be taking place on Wednesday, November 29th, so a bit far from now. We're going to be switching gears to a foreign policy focus. Our colleague Vonda Feldbab-Brown will be back out for her 100th visit. No, she's been here many, many times. She'll be talking here about the role of Mexico and China in U.S. policy response to fentanyl trafficking. So if you're interested, please come out Wednesday, November 29th. Thank you all again. Have a good evening.